Imagine you have like a laboratory notebook, but instead of recording chemical reactions or physics equations, you are meticulously documenting the exact botanical compounds, the lunar phase, and the psychological state required to cure a migraine.
Right, and you note the failures, you catalog the successes, you even track the barometric pressure.
Exactly. And if you are caught with this notebook, you will be executed.
Yeah, the stakes for keeping empirical data haven't always been just academic. I mean, sometimes they were a matter of literal survival.
So today we are opening a text that survived precisely this kind of history. Welcome to a highly customized deep dive. Our mission today is to explore a really dense, fascinating document simply titled A Book of Shadows.
And, you know, right off the bat, we need to clarify something.
Yeah, definitely. Because for you listening right now, I know exactly what that title evokes. You hear Book of Shadows, and your mind probably goes straight to pop culture tropes.
Spooky spell books, bubbling cauldron.
Hollywood curses, pointy hats, the whole 9 yards. Just take all those preconceived notions, put them in a little box, and leave them outside the room. The source material we are unpacking today reveals something entirely different.
It really does. We are looking at a deeply psychological, surprisingly scientific, and intensely personal manual for practicing Wicca.
It's a deep dive into the intersection of nature, human psychology, and the unseen world. And this is tailored specifically for you, the listener, who loves multiple perspectives, who thrives on those aha moments, and who wants to look at magic through the lens of early scientific observation.
And deep psychological conditioning, yeah. Because the very first thing this text does is completely rewire our modern understanding of what a witch actually is.
Right, it strips away centuries of folklore.
Exactly. It looks at the historical context. In early society, the witch wasn't like a supernatural villain living out in the creepy woods. The witch functioned as a healer, a counselor, a sage, and crucially, a meteorologist.
See, calling a witch a meteorologist completely reframes the whole mythology for me. It moves them from a supernatural threat to an essential tribal asset.
Yeah, because if you are living in an agrarian, early human society, your survival depends entirely on empirical data.
Right, you need to know when it's going to rain.
Exactly. Early humans had zero tolerance for nonsense. The text points out that if a practice didn't contribute to the survival of the tribe, if it didn't help predict climactic changes for planting or harvesting or migrating, it was discarded immediately.
Wow.
So the first witches were individuals who possessed the skills to enhance the chances for the continuity of the species. They were the ultimate observers. They were, in essence, the earliest scientists.
Which means this Book of Shadows isn't a book of arbitrary spooky incantations.
Not at all.
The text explicitly defines a Book of Shadows as a magical diary that functions exactly like a scientist's laboratory notebook.
Yeah, it is a highly individual record. A practitioner would use it to meticulously document methods, materials, rituals, chants, tools.
Basically, their entire spiritual and practical toolkit.
Right. And through careful observation and analysis, they would synthesize working methods. They recorded the results of their operations, whether it was a healing spell, a botanical treatment using herbal lore, or, simply a recipe for Sabbath cakes.
So the scientific method totally applies here.
Oh, absolutely. If a spell worked, it was recorded. If it failed, it was recorded.
And originally, this was an oral tradition, right? Like we see this with the Druids?
Yes. They passed down vast amounts of botanical and astronomical knowledge through these complex songs and poems.
But relying on the spoken word is a massive vulnerability, isn't
A
it?
huge one. The text notes that if a culture meets a catastrophic circumstance, like an invasion, a plague, a sudden shift in climate, that informational chain is broken.
And the wisdom is just permanently lost.
Exactly. So some cultures recognize the need for permanent physical records to safeguard the data.
And then came the burning times.
Right. The era of intense persecution across Europe and beyond.
Possession of a Book of Shadows became a sure death sentence. I mean, the mere accusation could destroy a whole bloodline. So this empirical data, this scientific record of survival, it was forced to go completely underground.
The practitioners had to adapt. The books were written in elaborate codes, utilizing special alphabets, ancient runes, pictograms, and intensely personal encryption methods.
They even included deliberate red herrings, right?
Yeah, healthy doses of nonsense passages.
That is so clever. You hide the actual botanical cure for an infection inside a paragraph about, like, flying on a broomstick.
Exactly, to thoroughly confuse any uninitiated reader or witch hunter who might confiscate the book.
It totally explains why, for so many centuries, this knowledge looked like complete gibberish or dark magic to outsiders. It wasn't dark magic, it was a cryptographic survival mechanism.
That's a perfect way to put it. And moving into the modern era, the text emphasizes that contemporary Wicca retains this hunger for raw, verifiable data. Wicca is presented as incredibly eclectic.
Meaning they borrow from other traditions constantly.
Yes, all the time. Celtic lore, Nordic runes, the mystery cults of ancient Greece and Rome.
I love the line where the author specifically notes, Wicca has no pope.
Right. There is no central authority dictating the dogma.
It reminds me of an open source hacker's manual or a programmer's GitHub repository.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You have all these independent practitioners constantly borrowing lines of code from each other, testing it out in the real world, keeping the snippets that run flawlessly, and just discarding the bugs.
Yeah. If a Sumerian talisman works in your ritual, you put it in your code. If a Welsh myth resonates with your psychological state, you compile it in.
The text actually says, when it came to knowledge, arcane or mundane, no witch was ever too proud to borrow.
The pragmatic utility of the knowledge always supersedes its origin.
But, okay, let me push back on this for a second. If everyone is just writing their own rule book, pulling from different pantheons, using whatever codes they want, without a central holy text, how do you even define that as a cohesive religion?
That is a very fair question.
Right. Because if my code looks nothing like your code, aren't we just doing two completely different things?
Well, the cohesion doesn't stem from forced dogma or a standardized holy book. According to this text, the cohesion comes from shared goals and the rigorous testing of results.
So it's about the methodology, not the specific ingredients.
Exactly. The author states the common bonds include a reverence for all creation, a recognition of unseen forces that can be summoned or tapped into, and a supreme interest in humanity's survival and psychological health.
So the unity is in the underlying framework, testing, observing, and taking absolute responsibility for your actions.
Spot on. And to understand how these practitioners actually measure their results, we have to look at the physics of their universe.
Right, because they are operating under a specific set of universal laws that govern this focused intent.
Yes. The text outlines 3 core principles that act as the fundamental physics of magic. First is the Wiccan Rede,
which goes, do what you will, and ye harm none.
It sounds deceptively simple, just don't hurt anyone. But the text immediately pairs it with the threefold law, which complicates things immensely.
The karmic multiplier.
Yeah. For every 7 deeds you've done, expect to get back 21. Whatever you put out into the world, whether positive or negative, is returned to you multiplied by 3.
And the third concept governing this universe is polarity, which the text ties back to Hermetic principles.
Let's actually break down Hermetic principles for the listener, because that is a pretty dense term.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Essentially, we are talking about the ancient philosophical concept of as above, so below. The idea that the macrocosm, like the entire universe, is reflected in the microcosm of the individual human being.
Right. And part of that reflection is polarity. Light and dark, positive and negative, male and female, expansion and contraction.
The text uses the triple goddess to represent this cosmic polarity.
Yes, you have the maiden, representing the waxing moon, expansion and increase, the mother, representing the full moon and complete fulfillment, and the crone, representing the waning or new moon,
which is the energy of decrease, decay, and banishment. Now, our modern pop culture has trained us to view negative magic, or that waning moon energy, as inherently evil.
Like the villain is always using dark, negative magic.
Exactly. But this text argues vehemently against that binary.
It really does. Negative forces are simply the opposite polarity required to maintain systemic balance. It's an intensely pragmatic view of the universe.
The author provides this brilliant modern ethical dilemma to illustrate this.
Yeah.
Imagine a practitioner uses magic to shut down a massive, heavily polluting factory in their town.
Okay, a big real-world problem.
Right. Shutting down the factory saves the local environment, stops the river from being poisoned, prevents illness. It is a massive positive outcome.
But the direct result of shutting down that factory is that hundreds of workers lose their jobs. Families face economic ruin. The local economy crashes.
Exactly. That is a massive negative outcome. Under the rule of harm none, what have you done?
The author states unequivocally that working toward closing that factory is negative work, even if the macro outcome is positive.
Wow. Because you caused harm to those workers.
Yes. The witch incurs a debt that must be paid. The text compares it to a surgeon. A surgeon uses negative energy cutting flesh, removing an organ, killing a virus, in order to save the patient.
So the waning moon, the crone, is used to banish illness. It's not evil, it is absolutely necessary, but it still carries a profound karmic weight.
Right. And knowing that the threefold law is in effect, this sounds paralyzing, doesn't it?
Honestly, yes. If I know that even a well-intentioned act like saving the local river will bring a threefold karmic return for the job losses I caused, how do I ever cast a spell?
It seems like you just sit in a dark room, terrified to move, lest the universe retaliate against you.
Exactly. So how does a witch ever act without fear of cosmic retaliation?
Well, the text is clear. Wiccans do not believe in absolution. There is no higher authority you can pray to at the end of the day to wipe the slate clean.
No get out of jail free card.
None. Magic is not a shortcut. It is a heavy burden of responsibility. You have to be absolutely sure of your intentions. You consult divination. You sit with your intuition. You weigh the outcomes.
And if you decide to act, you accept the bill when it comes due.
You take ultimate responsibility. And wielding these immense consequential laws requires an incredibly disciplined mechanism.
And according to this Book of Shadows, the primary tool of magic isn't an obsidian dagger or a crystal wand. The primary tool is the human mind.
The text's psychological framework is where it becomes truly brilliant. It argues that the human mind is fundamentally divided, and bridging this division is the entire secret to making magic function.
The author breaks the brain down into two distinct personas, the rational mind and the intuitive mind.
And the analogy used for the rational mind is so good, it's a bank auditor.
Yes, the bank auditor demands empirical logic. It counts the physical candles on the altar, it quantifies the syllables in the chants, it insists that the planetary correspondences align perfectly with astronomical charts.
It is highly critical, it hates ambiguity, and it demands rational explanations for every single step of a ritual.
Then you have the intuitive mind, which the text calls the child mind.
Right. And the child mind is driven purely by the five senses. It thrives on rhymes, vibrant colors, music, dancing, and imagination.
And crucially, it completely ignores conventional logic. The intuitive mind doesn't care about the spreadsheet at all.
No, it doesn't. The author points out that the child mind is the part of you that believes if you break a cookie in half, the calories leak out, making it diet food.
I love that example so much.
The intuitive mind associates pleasure with accomplishment. If breaking the cookie feels like a loophole, the intuitive mind accepts it as truth.
So you have the auditor constantly demanding facts and generating doubt, and the child wanting sensory play and emotional resonance. To cast a spell, you have to get them working simultaneously.
Right. The text outlines the mechanics of spellwork not as an external supernatural event, but as a deliberate psychological trick you play on yourself.
It is all about cognitive alignment. Because if the bank auditor isn't appeased, it will ruin the spell with a steady stream of internal criticism.
Doubt is the absolute enemy of magic.
It makes me think of sneaking vegetables into a kid's meal, but in reverse.
Huh. How so?
Well, you have this strict, boring adult brain, the auditor, and you feed it a giant spreadsheet of magical correspondences. You give it elaborate tables of planetary hours, specific botanical scents for specific cardinal directions, exact numbers of rhythmic breaths to count.
Oh, I see. You give the auditor so much complex busy work that it gets completely distracted checking the math.
Exactly. And while the rational auditor is occupied with the arithmetic of the ritual, the inner child is free to slip past and interact with the universe.
That makes perfect sense. The intuitive mind connects with the objective of the spell through the sensory inputs. The thick smell of frankincense, the hypnotic rhythm of the chanted poetry, the visual beauty of the silver chalice.
This completely demystifies magic for me. It's not that the universe demands you light a specific green candle on a Thursday during a waxing moon to get a promotion at work.
The universe doesn't care about your candle.
Exactly. Your brain needs that rigid structure to bypass its own paralyzing self-doubt. The ritual convinces the rational mind that success is mathematically logical, while deeply satisfying the intuitive mind's desire for symbolic meaning.
But if the intuitive mind is the engine driving this magical intent, and the rational mind is the steering wheel, you need a severe maintenance routine.
Right, you have to keep the machine running.
The Book of Shadows details a 4-part workout regimen for the mind, identifying 4 non-negotiable requirements of magic: will, imagination, faith, and secrecy.
Let's break those down. The text treats these like actual cognitive muscles that will atrophy if you don't condition them. Let's look at the first pillar, will.
And the text makes a vital distinction here. Magical will is not just your everyday determination to power through a boring meeting or force yourself out of bed when it's raining.
Magical will is the innermost burning desire of your entire being.
It is the raw propellant of magic. To train this, the author provides a vivid cognitive exercise called the will stew.
Okay, this is a fascinating exercise in consuming your own psychological resistance.
Yeah, walk us through it.
So, you enter a meditative state and visualize a heavy iron cauldron bubbling over a fire. You mentally take a task you have been dreading, say, confronting a toxic family member or filing complex taxes, and you throw it into the boiling water.
Okay.
Then you examine all your excuses for not doing it. I'm too tired. It will cause drama. I don't have time. You take each of those excuses, visualize them as herbs and spices, and you sprinkle them into the cauldron.
I love this. You are not ignoring or repressing your resistance, which is what standard willpower attempts to do. You are acknowledging the resistance, transforming it, and consuming it.
Right. You visualize taking a bowl of this stew and eating it with immense relish. You feel the physical heat of the task and the dissolved excuses entering your bloodstream, assimilating into your cells, actually nourishing you.
You hold this visualization until you feel that you have fed on the raw energy of the gods, and absolutely nothing can stand in your way.
It's powerful. But I have a question about the concept of the will. Because if will is rooted in the child mind, isn't it kind of like a spoiled brat that just wants what it wants?
Yes, absolutely.
So how do you keep it from turning into obsession or addiction?
The author is very careful to provide a stark warning about exactly that. Because the will is fundamentally selfish, it doesn't care about the threefold law or the consequences.
It just wants the cookie.
Right. An unchecked, overdeveloped will can quickly lead to destructive behavior. It is a sleeping dragon that must be chained to the other pillars.
Which brings us to the second pillar, faith. But faith in this Wiccan context is drastically different from the way standard theology uses the word.
Oh, completely. It is not blind belief. It is not suspending your rational thought to accept a holy mystery.
It brings us right back to the laboratory notebook. Faith in this system is the scientific method applied to subjective reality.
Exactly. You build faith through empirical tracking. You observe the natural world, the precise return of the solstice, the predictable cycle of the tides, and you extrapolate that the unseen universe operates on equally reliable, if invisible, laws.
So if you cast a spell to heal a headache, and the headache vanishes, you record it in your journal.
And if it fails, you record that too. Over years, as your notebook fills with verifiable successes, your faith in your own capability increases. Faith is just the accumulation of observable data.
That makes so much sense. Now, the third pillar is imagination. The text posits that modern industrialized society aggressively beats imagination out of us.
We are told from childhood to live in the real world and stop daydreaming. But for a practitioner, visualization is the primary mechanism of altering reality.
To rebuild that atrophied muscle of visualization, the text provides the orange exercise, and it starts by guiding you into an alpha brainwave state.
Right. An alpha state is that deeply relaxed, yet highly focused mental condition you experience just before falling asleep or during deep meditation. The brain slows its electrical activity down from the frantic beta waves of daily stress.
The author describes getting there through this beautiful sensory visualization. You picture yourself walking through a thick fog that slowly shifts through all the colors of the visual spectrum.
Deep red fog, moving into orange, then yellow, green, blue, indigo, and finally violet.
Until you emerge into a pure, infinite white void, a blank slate.
And in that void, the exercise instructs you to visualize an orange. But mere visual rendering isn't enough. You must construct it using every sense the child mind possesses.
You smell the sharp citrus oil as you pierce the skin. You feel the heavy, dimpled texture of the peel. You hear the specific sound it makes as you pull a segment apart.
Then you consciously endow this visualized orange with impossible, perfect traits. You make the color a vibrancy that doesn't exist in nature. You make the taste overwhelming.
You construct the most perfect fruit descended from Olympus itself. You are training your neural pathways to hold an alternative reality with absolute sensory clarity.
But there is a grounding mechanism built into this exercise, too. When you finish the meditation and return to the mundane world, you must accept that the next physical orange you eat will have bruises, seeds, and flaws.
So it trains the imagination, but also teaches the rational mind the limits of forcing perfection onto physical nature.
Exactly. Which brings us to the fourth and perhaps most strategically fascinating pillar, secrecy.
Now, we've established why secrecy was necessary during the historical burning times. It was literal life or death. But why has secrecy survived as a psychological tool today? I mean, practicing Wicca isn't illegal anymore.
The text repeats a core maxim, say little, do much. It really comes down to psychic energy conservation.
How so?
The author uses the analogy of a car battery. The practitioner acts as a storage battery for the magical energy they are cultivating through will and imagination. If you sit in your driveway with the engine off, but you leave the headlights glaring and the radio blasting, you will quickly drain the battery dead.
Ah, and telling people about your magic is leaving the headlights on.
Precisely. Seeking external validation is a massive drain on focus. If you are trying to impress your friends at a dinner party by bragging about your spell work, or if you are constantly arguing with skeptical family members to defend your beliefs, you are dissipating the exact energy you need to fuel the spell.
So if you adopt the persona of the friendly neighborhood weirdo, you are expending immense cognitive load just maintaining that identity.
And defending your reality against the disbelief of others. True power requires silence. You build the charge in secret, and you release it only in the ritual.
Okay, so assume you've completed the conditioning. Your will is an unstoppable engine. Your faith is backed by years of journal data. Your imagination can construct tactile realities, and your battery is fully charged through absolute secrecy.
You are finally ready to interface with the unseen universe, the other world.
And engaging the other world requires understanding a fundamental distinction: invocation versus evocation. The text is incredibly precise about this boundary.
It is. So, invocation is calling inward. You are absorbing the energetic power or archetype of an entity into yourself, or into a physical tool like a chalice, to temporarily gain its attributes.
You invite the courage of a warrior god into your own nervous system.
Right. Evocation, conversely, is calling forth. You are asking an entity to attend your physical space and assist you as a separate, independent being. You are not absorbing them, you are conversing with them.
And the etiquette of evocation described here is profoundly different from traditional ceremonial magic.
Oh, completely.
In ceremonial magic, you often draw a protective circle, summon a spirit, and threaten it with divine names until it submits to your command. But Wiccans do not command. Wiccans ask. You have to be polite, firm, and courageous.
It's a relationship predicated on mutual respect and ecological balance, not subjugation. The text advises extensive research before evoking anything. You learn the entity's history, its likes and dislikes.
You make them comfortable by burning their preferred botanical incense, utilizing their colors, offering traditional libations. It's exactly like hosting a dinner party for a very important, slightly volatile celebrity.
That's the perfect way to look at it.
If you invite an A-list actor to your house, you wouldn't lock the door and demand they scrub your kitchen floor. You'd curate a fantastic atmosphere, offer them their favorite vintage wine, treat them with immense respect, and then, politely, ask if they might do you a favor.
And if the entity declines, you accept the refusal gracefully. The text also issues a very practical warning about matching the archetype to the problem.
Right, because some ancient warrior deities might be willing to help, but their methods are archaic.
Yeah, if you evoke a Bronze Age war god to help resolve a dispute with your landlord, the energy they provide might be far too savage and destructive for modern conflict resolution.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, there is a deeply illuminating section regarding blood magic that ties into this respect.
Yes, the text vehemently condemns animal sacrifice, stating plainly that spilling the blood of an innocent creature is abhorrent and violates the fundamental rule of harm none.
But it does note that certain ancient warrior archetypes demand a blood oath to show commitment. In that specific scenario, a tiny prick of the practitioner's own blood is used.
Because offering your own blood demonstrates absolute personal commitment and assumes the risk onto yourself, rather than subjugating a helpless animal to bypass the work. It's an assertion of extreme personal responsibility.
There is also a psychological caveat embedded in these otherworld interactions that completely reframes the theology for me. The text asks, are these gods and spirits real, independent entities living in another dimension, or are they merely personifications of the human subconscious?
Right. Are we just talking to deeply embedded archetypes in our own brain?
And the author's answer to that existential question is to shrug and advise the practitioner to just suspend judgment.
It doesn't matter. The mechanism works either way. The author notes that calling a screwdriver by another name or misunderstanding the metallurgy of the steel doesn't make it any less effective at driving a screw.
So whether the entity is an external deity or an internal psychological construct, the evocative ritual triggers the desired change.
Just make sure you understand the hierarchy, whether it's external or internal. The text warns against jumping rank.
Ah, yes. You don't bother the supreme, highest deities with mundane problems like finding your lost car keys.
No, you wouldn't burst into the office of a multinational CEO to ask them to fix a paper jam on the second floor. You go to the right level of management. You call on local spirits or lesser archetypes for daily issues.
But if you are opening yourself up to these deep psychological archetypes or literal otherworld spirits, how do you keep your rational bank auditor brain from panicking about safety?
You need architecture. You need a physical and mental container to run the experiment safely.
That brings us to the circle. The circle is not merely a geometric shape drawn on the carpet in chalk. The text defines it as a transformer for raw energy, a doorway between worlds, a place that is not a place, in a time that is not a time.
It is an isolated pocket of reality. The author breaks down 3 specific types of circles. First is the simple protective circle.
Which is an entirely mental construct drawn in the air with the mind, used for quick focus or defense in crowded, mundane spaces.
Next is the portal circle. The circle is deliberately left open to otherworld contact. It acts as an energetic beacon.
And the text warns that using this requires the practitioner to be a warrior, right? Because an open door allows anything to walk through.
Yes, you must have the psychological fortitude to defend yourself and banish unwanted influences that are attracted to the beacon.
Finally, there's the formal circle. This is the elaborate architecture used for sabbats, esbats, and major ritual work. It requires physical tools, the atom, the ceremonial salt, the consecrated water, and the formal calling of the quarters.
The mapping of the elements to the cardinal quarters is where the text essentially constructs a spatial map for cognitive behavioral therapy. Let's look at the mechanism of these directions.
Okay, so in the north, we anchor the element of earth. Earth represents foundation, physical form, the body. Its positive psychological trait is steadfastness and endurance. Its negative extreme is stubbornness and stagnation.
In the east, we have Ger. Air is the intellect, inspiration, and imagination. The positive is deep intuition and brilliant ideas. The negative extreme is chaos, overthinking, and madness.
In the south holds fire. Fire is passion, rapid change, and kinetic thought. Positively, it is the energy of creation and courage. Negatively, it is all-consuming destruction, rage, and obsession.
And the west is water. Water represents tranquility, the subconscious, and the mirror of the soul. Positively, it provides emotional reflection and the gentle dissolving of problems. Negatively, it manifests as emotional flooding, depression, laziness, and instability.
And in the dead center is ether, or spirit. This represents the void, pure change, the paradox that contains all the other elements simultaneously.
So, by physically walking around this circle, picking up the heavy steel athame to slice the air, physically mixing the granular salt into the cold water, the practitioner is grounding their mind.
They're feeding the bank auditor brain undeniable physical data.
Exactly. If you just sat in a chair and tried to conceptualize the balance of earth and air, your mind would wander. By creating physical architecture, you force the brain to remain present.
The text uses these spatial directions to map psychological health. Imagine someone who only lives in the east all air, no earth. They have a million brilliant startup ideas, incredible inspiration, but they never sit down to register an LLC or build a foundation.
That is air without earth. It leads to a chaotic, unproductive life. The ritual of the circle physically enforces the necessity of balancing all 4 elements within the self. You cannot harness the fire of your ambition without the water of emotional regulation, or you will burn out completely.
But practically speaking, how does a practitioner use this in modern life? The text explicitly brings up the scenario of being at a highly stressful family gathering, dealing with dear old Aunt Emma, who is aggressively criticizing your life choices and draining your emotional energy.
We all have an Aunt Emma.
Right. But you can't exactly pull out a dagger and start throwing salt around the turkey dinner to protect your mental health.
This is where the mental conditioning of the 4 pillars pays off. The text details the use of the alpha trigger.
Oh, right, from the orange exercise.
Yeah. Through repetition, you train your brain to associate a very subtle, undetectable physical movement with instantly dropping into that calm alpha state.
I want you listening to think about this right now. If you're driving or washing dishes, imagine creating a physical trigger. The text suggests something as simple as interlacing your fingers or pressing your thumb to your index finger.
You sit at the tense family dinner, Aunt Emma starts interrogating you, and instead of reacting with defensive beta wave anxiety, you casually interlace your fingers under the table.
That physical trigger bypasses the conscious panic. Your brain instantly downshifts into alpha. Your breathing slows.
And in that alpha state, your trained imagination instantly erects the simple protective circle. You visualize a sphere of impenetrable blue light surrounding your body.
The psychic attack, the emotional drain, hits the blue light and bounces off. You remain perfectly centered, polite, and completely unaffected by the mundane chaos around you.
The physical and psychological structures of the circle ultimately serve a higher purpose. They allow the witch to exist safely and functionally in the world while contemplating the deepest mysteries of existence.
Which leads us to the final, sweeping philosophy of the text. The text synthesizes all these micro-practices, the psychological conditioning, the elemental mapping, the scientific journaling into a macro worldview. It explores the Wiccan and Celtic perception of time and creation.
Time is not a linear arrow shooting straight from Genesis to an apocalypse. Time is an endless looping knot.
Creation is not an event that happened once in the distant past. It is an ongoing, continuous process happening right now, in every blooming flower and decaying leaf.
Humanity is not placed on top of this process to rule it. Humanity is deeply embedded within it.
The text also tackles gender and societal structure in a really nuanced way. It discusses the historical roots of matriarchy, positing that it stemmed from early humanity, observing the awe-inspiring, terrifying power of birth. Women possess the obvious magic of creating life.
However, the text balances this by emphasizing the necessity of both male and female energetic archetypes for survival. It maps the male energy to the hunter and the sun external projective force, and the female energy to the farmer and the moon internal receptive nurturing force.
It even offers a critique of certain modern cultural trends that attempt to completely erase masculine warrior energy.
Yes. The author argues that both the capacity to gently nurture and the capacity to fiercely protect are essential, deeply ingrained human survival traits. To reject either the sun or the moon is to throw out half the human psychological toolkit. True power lies in balancing the fierce and the gentle.
This leads to perhaps the most fascinating demonstration of the author's pragmatism. The text includes a detailed, highly unorthodox analysis of the Bible.
Now, we need to be very clear here.
Yes, a quick impartiality note. We are not taking a theological stance today. Whether you are coming from a traditional Christian background, a pagan one, or a strictly secular one, we're just reporting how the author completely reframes Genesis and the Old Testament.
Right. We aren't looking at this as objective theology, but as a masterclass in how the Wiccan mindset pragmatically repurposes any text to find its psychological utility.
Because the author does not view the Bible as an enemy text. They approach it as deeply philosophical dialogue between humanity and the macrocosm. They read it through an Earth-centric ecological lens.
For example, the story of Noah and the Ark is viewed not just as a historical or mythical flood, but as a divine mandate for environmentalism.
It's interpreted as a command that humans are custodians of the Earth, fundamentally responsible for the preservation and survival of all species. The author also views biblical angels as otherworld entities, functionally identical to the spirits, devas, or deities of other pantheons.
They also dive into linguistic history, pointing out massive translation shifts that altered human history. The author argues that King James intentionally translated the Hebrew word for poisoner into the English word witch in the famous mandate, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live."
By altering that one word, a political translation shift justified centuries of persecution against tribal healers and midwives.
Now, a traditional Christian might find reading Noah as an ecological pagan metaphor heretical, and a traditional pagan might wonder why a Book of Shadows is quoting the Bible at all.
But that tension perfectly illustrates the definition of the witch, according to this document. The witch is the ultimate pragmatist. They are scientists of the spirit. They take wisdom from every source, whether it's an ancient Celtic myth, the Book of Genesis, a modern psychology textbook, or quantum physics.
If a concept yields practical, verifiable results and helps them align with the ongoing process of creation, they compile it into their code. They view the microcosm of themselves as a perfect reflection of the macrocosm of the universe. To heal the earth, they must first heal and balance their own minds.
So let's synthesize this massive journey. What have we actually uncovered in this deep dive? This Book of Shadows isn't a manual for brewing potions out of Eye of Newt to curse your enemies.
No, it is a rigorous, deeply demanding framework for mastering your own psychology. It is about respecting the terrifying, beautiful power of the natural world, balancing the rigid demands of the rational auditor with the sensory needs of the intuitive child, and taking absolute, uncompromising accountability for your own karmic footprint in the universe.
It's about recognizing that every action has a threefold consequence, and having the discipline to act anyway, armed with will, imagination, faith, and secrecy. The text demystifies the mechanics of magic, while entirely preserving the awe of existence.
It is a system that requires the practitioner to simultaneously be the scientist conducting the experiment and the subject being altered by it.
We want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over today, something that builds on the architecture of everything we've just discussed. The text states a simple but profound rule. What you cannot find within will never be found without.
That's a beautiful thought.
You don't actually need a heavy seal athame, or a silver chalice, or a perfectly measured circle of salt to realize that you are the center of your own universe. The elemental corners of earth, air, fire, and water are ultimately just geographical metaphors for your own physical stability, your intellectual inspiration, your burning passion, and your deep emotions.
The real magic isn't in the book.
Exactly. The book is just the sheet music. You are the instrument. How will you tune yourself today?